Can you just go to your doctor and request a coronavirus test if you think you have symptoms, or if you're like this person, you're worried and you just don't know?
Well, right now, I don't know if insurance is going to pay for coronavirus testing for people who have no symptoms just because they're worried. The CDC's stipulations right now are that you have a fever or that you have had contact with a recent proven case, say someone in your family, and you're living with them. So that's an insurance issue. That's not a medical issue. But the good news is that the big commercial labs that most of us use in private practice medicine, LabCorp and Quest, have finally gotten hold of their labs. Till about 2 weeks ago, you had to go through an arduous process of going to the hospital and having your lab specimen obtained, shipped to the CDC, and it took 4 or 5 days to get a sample back. Now the labs are set up and doctors' offices are starting to get supplied with the capability of taking a specimen.
Let's go back to the rodeo being canceled today, and they're talking about that 40-year-old patient who attended the barbecue cook-off. And I know you can't pinpoint without testing or whatever, but talk about you know, the likability or the opportunity, which is maybe high, that that someone could contract it from someone who was out there at the rodeo, or if he was sneezing, or if he was handling food, or if he bumped into people or shook hands with a person. You know, how concerned should those people be in case they did come in contact with those guys?
If someone had physical contact with him or was within 6 feet of him sneezing or coughing, there's a high probability they'll get the virus. The attack rate, we call attack rate, and meaning you get exposed and what's the chances you get the virus, are not at the level of something like measles, which is 100%. If you're in a room and you never had measles and you're 20 feet away from somebody, you're going to get measles. With this, it's not really known what the attack rate, except that the doubling time is 6 to 7 days in cases over large populations like in China and Italy. Says this is a highly transmissible disease. It's going to hit every state, and it's going to hit a huge part of our population.
And being an infectious disease specialist, talk about, you know, the research being done now on the coronavirus. I know we're probably far out from a vaccine, but behind the scenes, as specialists and these experts, what does it look like for you all who are trying to figure out the attack rate and the ins and outs of this virus? There's just so much uncertainty of the virus right now.
Well, of course, we know that China gives misinformation on a lot of its numbers. So the numbers we're working off right now as assumptions, like the 14-day incubation period and that type of thing, and the mortality rates, are based on secondhand information. I think in about a month, when we have a sufficient number of cases in the United States, our administrative and healthcare organizations like CDC, epidemiologists, will have all those numbers hardcore figured out. As far as the vaccine goes, I think it's still a gamey issue. That it sounds like they're assuring the public we're going to have a vaccine. I mean, you have to realize that coronavirus, COVID-19, right now, COVID-19 is very closely related to SARS-2 virus from 2002 and MERS virus, and a lot of the cold viruses that we have for regular seasonal colds are coronaviruses, and we don't have vaccines for them. We have plenty of viruses around the world that we've known for a long time. We never have been able to develop a vaccine. We don't have a vaccine for HIV yet. So the idea of sort of, I think, almost promising the public that we're going to have a vaccine, I'd agree with Dr. Fauci, who's the head of CDC, that it's going to take a minimum of probably 6 months and probably more like a year. The vaccine, if there is a vaccine, might be ready for the second wave if it comes next winter, next fall. And these pandemics work in a way that they usually go in waves. You get a starter wave, it tapers off a little bit, and then it starts up again.
That was my next question. As a specialist and expert on this, what do you see this situation looking like a month from now, 2 months from now, all the way to 3 months from now?
Well, there'll be a point where so much of the population has been infected and then generated immunity that they're not open to infection anymore. So the targets for the virus will be less and less. So the incidence of disease will fall off. And we don't know if the virus is heat labile and UV light, ultraviolet light labile, which we hope it is. Right. We hope, like flu, and with better, warmer weather, people aren't congregating indoors as much in closed air spaces, that we'll see the incidence of cases taper off in Houston anyway, say in April.
Gotcha.
That's the hope, although right now we just don't know enough about the biology.
Gotcha.
What my advice to my colleagues right now has been to look at the way they're operating their offices and try to set up an operational method where when they have an appointment coming in, try to have the patients in the waiting room together the least amount of time so they get shown right to an exam room.
All right, friends, we're here on Facebook Live. We are live here in the ABC 13 newsroom, taking your questions about COVID-19, also known as the coronavirus. I know we have someone else who will be coming in a minute as I get ready for the 6:30 news, but we're still trying to get your questions answered by the infectious disease specialist, Dr. Ed Rensimer, who is answering some of these questions. All right, so. And I don't know if you know this, but people want to know, what is the recovery rate from the virus? Is it killing most of the people it infects?
No. Overall, the recovery rate's about 80% people having basically an ambulatory illness. They're at home, they're not in a hospital, they're not gravely ill, they're uncomfortable. They're like a routine case of flu. Right. About 15% of the people are ending up in the hospital.
Gotcha.
And almost all of those are elderly people.
Gotcha. All right, another question. Can a person's test come back as corona, OC43, have COVID-19? That person was not tested for COVID-19 at the hospital.
So what kind of,
it says, can a person's test come back as corona OC43 have COVID-19? So I guess that's a different version. But the person was not tested for COVID-19. Yeah, so should they go back? I think what she's trying to ask is, should we go back and ask for that specific test?
Yes, because these tests are not cultures and they're not antibody tests. They're very specific to the genetic material of that virus. They're called a PCR test.
Yep. All right, another question. What is the temperature that is considered a reason for her to get her kids out of school and to be concerned about COVID-19?
Well, in general, probably any temperature above 100 or 100.2 is considered a fever. There are rare individuals who have normal body temperatures of 100, but once you get above 100 or 100.2, you're probably dealing with a fever. And then you have to get to the source of the fever, whether it's COVID-19 or it's flu or it's some other illness.
Got you. All right, so some other questions people have. Have any animals shown signs of being sick from this? And what has been the quickest recovery time in one person with coronavirus?
I'm not aware of any animals that have been sick, but some animals like dogs in China have been cultured and found positive.
Got you. All right, so any other groups who should be most concerned right now besides the elderly?
Well, certainly anybody with any condition or medication that compromises their immune system. People on steroids, people with autoimmune diseases, people with natural immunity weakness that they were born with, genetic problems. So people who have a weakened immune system would be in the same group as the elderly people.
Let's go from the beginning. Where does this start? If a person may have been infected with COVID-19, what are some of the first symptoms that they will start to see?
It's usually going to be upper respiratory symptoms like a sore, scratchy throat and a low-grade fever. And then when it progresses more down into the lower respiratory tract, where it becomes a pneumonic illness, pneumonia, then shortness of breath and sometimes chest pain and cough. Cough would be a prominent symptom.
Got you. All right. Will this calm down as it gets hotter here in Texas? Should we be buying only frozen foods and canned goods at this point?
Well, as I said, I think that it's unknown whether the virus is going to be somehow modified or diminished or harmed by heat and ultraviolet light. So we don't know that answer if it's going to calm down. As far as buying food for storage, it's going to depend on your perception of the amount of panic out there. We shouldn't have to be doing that. We should really be concentrating on the high-risk people and the rest of us just living our lives.
And how do you do that? I mean, should they be isolating? I know we have changed some rules and put an emphasis on people in the nursing homes. What else should be done as we switch here with Melanie? I've got to get ready for the 6:30 newscast. But how do we do that? How do we, deal with this growing concern for the elderly people who are more at risk?
Sure. I think that first of all, if you're going to go visit someone who's elderly, you ought to be washing your hands going in the door. And secondly, the less human contact they have right now and exposure to their grandkids or whoever who are in schools and stuff, the better. It may not sound very nice, but probably doing a lot more FaceTime with the grandkids than having to go see grandma and grandpa until we know more about this epidemic is a smart thing. It's a loving thing to do, is to keep distance.
All right, we're going to switch out here, Dr. Rensimer.
Well, we're going to try. First of all, you get to put on my microphone.
Okay, I got you.
And I'm going to ask him a question.
Okay.
Where's the camera?
Yeah.
So
It's right there.
that's
I know, so we should all be talking to the camera. By the way, Doctor, good to meet you. I'm Melanie
meet you.
Lawson,
Okay.
and I think I am taking over.
Start as a person who's about
Okay.
65, 70 is where the mortality goes way up, but 65, 60, 65
Thank you
starts
so much.
ascending.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Well, and we do have Chris Hansen here, who
I
is
was
in
just
charge
throwing
of
a
the
question because I'm about to
No.
turn 60. I needed to know where I was in the risk window.
But you know what? That's not a bad idea, and I'm glad you brought that up. We've been talking about age, and I have a question here. I don't know that you and Chauncey have talked about it. By the way, for all of you all who are joining us just now, John.
Quick, so just a heads up, at 6:30 we're going to dip into you sort of at the top.
Okay.
We won't talk to you. We'll just say, hey, we're
Okay,
talking
you'll
right now.
just
We'll
shoot us,
dip
yeah.
into what you're doing and keep on going.
Okay, because I didn't put on an IFB, so I'm glad you told me that. By the way, we're in the middle of the newsroom, everybody, as you probably figured out, so people are going to be coming and going. I'm Melanie Lawson, and I'm here with Dr.
Rensimer?
Rensimer. I want to make sure I say it correctly. And we are talking about what everybody's talking about, that is the coronavirus at this point and how it affects all of us. So if you have questions as we're here on Facebook Live, we would love to see them. Meanwhile, we're going to take a look at some of the questions we've been getting so far. But I wanted to get back to 65. And you said that's kind of a magical age along with 70, which puts you at a much higher risk. But here's a good question. I'm healthy and 65. I drive a school bus. Each day, approximately 150 students get on and off the school bus. What do you think of my risk associated with being that driver?
Yeah, we addressed that with Chauncey, that with that much exposure to that many people, and who knows, with these kids, they're not even sick and they can be shedding the virus, that if you're going to stay at work, you should be using hand cleansers all the time, regularly, maybe every hour, and you would even be probably prudent to, if you're that old, to wear a mask, a protective mask.
Really, so if you are around a lot of kids every day,
Yeah.
and the real key for young people is that they seem to be healthy enough to ward off the disease,
Right.
but they can certainly be carriers. Is that a good way to
That's
describe
right.
it?
Yeah, they can be shedding virus actively, and that's been shown already, well shown. They can be shedding virus, and they appear totally normal. They feel normal. They're eating normally.
Mm-hmm. And that is the real problem. Are there any special things in place for those in the sickle cell community? This is a question that just came in. And are they part of those who are at risk? We've been talking a lot about people with compromised immune systems or serious illnesses. Would they be certainly at high risk?
Well, certainly a sickler is, if they get ill with anything because of that underlying blood disorder, it's going to be a rough ride for them. But the only thing that happens with sickle cell disease is, and they're living a lot longer now with new therapies, is some of them will scar down and lose their spleen over the decades, so that when they get in their 20s and 30s, they virtually have no spleen, which is a major organ for immunity. The good news about that is the spleen is mainly protected for bacterial infections, so that shouldn't translate.
And this is viral,
and this
so we
is
always
viral.
want to make sure.
So I wouldn't see them as a high-risk group, but just in general, if they got really ill with it, it just could be, they'd be laid up.
Okay, so the virus on top of any other underlying illnesses
Right.
can be a real problem.
But in terms of being a threat for death, I don't think they'd be in an extraordinary group for that risk.
Okay, any more than most people. All right, here's another illness. What can people do to protect themselves that are already infected with HIV, the AIDS virus? And certainly there are different categories. Are there not people who are doing very well on the medication, so they have virtually no sign of the disease, versus somebody who perhaps is in full-blown mode there?
Well, the fact of HIV now, and HIV started when I started my career in '81, so I've been through the really bad HIV decades, and we're not there now. HIV is an illness that there's a normal life expectancy on medications, and almost all our HIV people now walk in as if they're a diabetic or somebody with high blood pressure. In other words, their immune systems are not impaired. They're fully reestablished if they're taking their medication. So I wouldn't see them as a special group for this problem, because they've been corrected by medicines.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the kinds of illnesses that might really put you at risk. So we'll set aside the issue of age. We already know that over a certain age you're going to be much higher risk. But are there certain diseases that really you worry about?
Well, if you look at with the virus, where the target organs are, which is what we always do with infections, the target organs right now, we don't have a lot of science developed. It's going to take some months to really understand this. But the target organ is mainly the respiratory tract.
So your lungs.
It's basically lungs and heart. A majority of people who are elderly who die from influenza don't actually die from the flu per se. They die because they've got coronary artery disease or they've got atherosclerosis and they end up having a fatal stroke, narrowing of the arteries or hardening the arteries of the brain. So they really die from a major stroke or a heart attack or arrhythmia or congestive heart failure. And this would be the same sort of thing, which is that the illness would overwhelm those parts of our body that are life critical but can't tolerate a huge stress with fever and so forth. The other group would be people obviously with underlying lung diseases, particularly COPD, chronic obstructive lung disease, emphysema, smokers. That group of folks, or people with chronic but maintained or congestive heart failure, if they were to get this, they are probably the people who are getting into the most trouble.
Well, we know that pneumonia can sometimes take a really sharp effect on someone. You start off with a bad cold, it turns into a flu, and then eventually pneumonia. Where does this compare, or do we yet know?
Well, it is a pneumonia, in fact, and the troubling thing about it in the early cases in China was they would get 4 members in a family who were sick, and because they were trying to study this and understand it, the 5th member in the family wasn't sick, a younger person, and they did CAT scans on all of them, and the people who were sick had florid pneumonia with COVID, and the asymptomatic younger person didn't have any illness, yet they had infiltrates in their lungs as if they had pneumonia, and so they were shedding high amounts of virus. So
but they were able to kind of fight back because
they were able
of
to
their
fight back.
youth and their
But yet they were teeming with virus and therefore spreading it to everyone. And that's one of the things that's really very odd about this disease is the degree to which it can be a sleeper.
Yeah, and you don't realize what's going on. And let's really kind of back up and go to square one, if you will. Obviously today the big news is that the rodeo is closing early. In fact, it has closed now. It is over, so the last 11 days will not exist this year, not until next season. And a lot of people very upset about that.
Sure.
We are making too much of it, they say. Perhaps we're overreacting. What, as an infectious diseases doctor, do you see as the biggest issue? And do you think that was a wise decision?
Well,
and I hate to put you on the spot.
It's awfully hard to second guess leadership. I mean, they can't win. If this is an overreaction, it cause a great economic hurt and a lot of panic. And if they underreact, and after the rodeo, there are tons and tons, thousands of cases, they're going to get blamed. Why didn't you shut the rodeo down?
Right.
It was like the president shutting down people coming in from China, and he was accused of being xenophobic. And now, at least, that probably accounted for a lot less of a problem today, even though it may go in that direction. But we'll have some time here to adjust to it. It's very hard because they have to make these decisions, and they're doing it on incomplete information. So.
And incomplete because this is a brand new disease.
It's a brand new disease, so they're going to say, you know what, it's going to cost us some money. We'll make it up, but you can't make up human lives. And if it's your grandfather or your mother or your father and they die, you're going to hold it against them. And so it's such a conflicted thing. I do think, for starters, if they didn't close the rodeo down, they certainly should have just put out a blanket prohibition against elderly people coming to those things. And all these things that they're considering closing, maybe they focus on the highly at-risk population. And I don't think there'd be public resentment to that. I think people understand that you're just trying to do something well for them. We wear masks in our office now. Of course, we're a special kind of practice, and everybody comes in, has to wash their hands. And the patients, at first I thought the patients would be upset, but the patients are really saying, you know, I really appreciate you doing this.
And understanding that.
And in fact, one of the things I'm looking at, and I'm not seeing anything from either federal or state or local officials, is focusing on those of us in the healthcare industry, because if there's any place that it's a focus of infirm people, people with diseases, people who are really vulnerable, it's our offices, it's our emergency rooms, it's the laboratories we send them to, the imaging centers. And I think we have to, as a profession, individually be a lot smarter about getting operationally slick about not having people come and sit in our waiting room for an hour with 10 other people. In our office, we're having it to where they want to make an appointment. When you arrive, give us a call on our back line, stay in your car, or stay in the lobby. If we're running behind 20 minutes, better you stay in your car
Than to come in.
than to come in, and then we'll gate you right into an exam room.
And, you're urging people that if they suspect there's something wrong with them, they're just feeling terrible, rather than show up in the waiting room,
Don't do
you
that.
want them to call ahead and warn you and say,
Exactly.
perhaps.
Yeah, do that as a public service. It's the golden rule, right?
Right.
And so just think of, you've got a problem, you feel awful enough about having the problem, but giving to someone else is even maybe worse.
Yeah.
So let the doctor know, let whoever you're going to visit know you're concerned about this. Is there anything I need to do? Give them a chance to meet you in the hallway with a mask and take you to an exam room, and everybody wins on that. And so, and that's what I'm trying to communicate to colleagues, is that we, each of us in our own workplace, have to look at the facts and say, how are we operationally serving our public and each individual person, and making sure that we're not exposing our staff.
Yeah.
What happens if a month from now there's a huge number of cases and 60% of the medical offices have been shut down because they're quarantined?
Yeah, because
and there's no healthcare workers.
Yeah, exactly. Which gets me back to the question I was asking. What is your biggest fear at this point? Are you most worried about, well, really, I'm going to let you say, what are you most worried about as we look at this brand new disease that seems to be growing by leaps and bounds, not just here in this country, but around the world?
Well, I think that the nature of pandemics, and for people who are interested in this stuff, I am, but I don't know everybody is, but if you want to read about a horrible pandemic, read about the Spanish flu of 1918, in which 675,000 Americans died, and 50 to 100 million people around the world died in a 2-year period. Now, that was propagated somewhat by troop movements for World War I, but what you have to know about that is that that pandemic started, and then it peaked in a wave and then remitted, and then it came in a second wave, and then it remitted over 2 years.
And did they ever figure out how it started and what it
It was a novel virus. It was just like this one. That word is a very specific word, adjective.
Yeah, what does it mean?
Novel means that it has no human experience. It has not been crossed through the human race ever. It's crossed over from the animal kingdom. And so it's novel to us, so we have no immunity. There's no leftover vaccine immunity from prior flu shots or anything. And so how we handle it biologically is new. And what happened in 1918 was 1/10 of the world's population at the time died.
Wow.
So
that's what we could be looking at.
I don't think we're looking at that. But
I think Monica is bringing us more questions, by the way, as we continue to talk. And in this case, you think it was
one of my worries, to get to your question, that was a long intro to a question, but one of my concerns, and I'm sure the concerns of the infectious disease community and epidemiologists, is that viruses have the capability as a passage through bodies, more and more and more bodies, to mutate. They keep reproducing and keep reproducing. Every so often an error gets thrown out, and that virus may die or it may live, and then another error, and that's what mutation is, genetic structural change. Now it can either mutate up to be more virulent, meaning more devastating to a body and more highly transmissible, or it can mutate down to be less of a problem. And the more spread this has, the more widely spread it has, the more chances for mutations, and that's totally a crapshoot. That's totally a slot machine thing of what's going to come out in the combination.
And I gather 100 years ago, 1918, when this was happening, there was no way for countries to communicate as quickly. Obviously, they don't have the luxury of Twitter or the internet or anything like that.
Well, they didn't have the luxury of that, and of course, they didn't have airliners, mostly shipping transport. But you see the way it spread back then, we can communicate, so in sometimes real time, we can be a little more proactive and real time reactive. The problem is, this is a global world. I mean, it's a global system now, and what's happening in Italy, I gotta believe, has to do with how many tourists they have come in there on a percentage basis. That's a tourist country, it's a tourist economy. And so when you have this interconnectivity of this magnitude, there's no running from this, and in some respects it could be amplified.
Yeah, I do want to just sort of update people again. Here we are on Facebook Live talking about what else but the coronavirus at this point. We all know that the rodeo was canceled today for the last 11 days, which is a real hit, not only to fun for the city, but obviously the economy. Several $100 million come into Houston every year as a result of the rodeo. But the sense from city and county leaders today, along with the folks who head up the rodeo, was this was something they felt they had to do. They did know of at least one person who was on the grounds of the rodeo at the barbecue cook-off who had a presumptive, I think is how we say it, presumptive coronavirus.
Well, it had to be an anguished decision, and
Yes.
what I would say, my response, you asked the question earlier, is sometimes after the initial alarm and anger would be to settle down and try to put yourself in their position and exercise a little empathy.
Yeah,
I would
exactly.
want to have, I can't think of the mayor or anyone else making that decision casually. I got to think this could be a career ender for them. And what if people died because they didn't make the call? So I don't know. I think it's a very tough moment.
Yeah, and you could tell they really anguished over it. Now we've got Monica standing by here. She's been helping us out, one of our web producers. You might want to come in here so they know I'm not talking to myself and wave at folks at home. We appreciate it. And you're bringing in several questions for me, and so
Yes.
these are the kinds of things you are seeing online.
Right, we have a post on our website, an article on our website where people can email questions. So these were questions that were emailed to us.
Okay.
And I'm also monitoring our Facebook feed to see what they're asking on Facebook.
That
So
sounds
these are
great.
the
And a
email
lot of these, really speak from not just this one person, but a lot of people feeling this way. And this may be someone that you were just talking about from Laura. I have asthma, COPD, as you mentioned, severe allergies. I'm also a diabetic. I'm always going to have breathing problems. How am I going to be able to tell the difference between, I guess, her regular breathing problems and this virus?
New onset, different cough and fever.
And fever.
And
So
fever.
fever is really the key in a lot of ways.
And likely you would have body aches. It wouldn't just be your chest. You'd just feel flu-like.
Okay, flu-like. And I keep hearing comparisons to the flu. Is this a lot like the flu?
It is. It's a viral respiratory illness, so it's very like it. Flu may have maybe a little bit more incidence of diarrhea. With COVID-19, it's about 3%, so it's a very minor part of the cases. But otherwise, it'll be very similar to flu.
Okay. Now, this is coming from Angelica. And by the way, Monica, thank you for making the letters big so I can read it. At what point does someone get tested for the coronavirus? What types of symptoms? We keep hearing this. How long with the symptoms? Can someone have the virus and not show those symptoms right away?
Yes. The incubation period right now, based on Chinese data, so we'll know better when we have our own experience to get numbers from in about 6 or 8 weeks. But right now it's about 14 days incubation. And so the
and
time
14 days of feeling badly, or 14 days after is
coming
when you
in
start
contact.
to feel badly? Okay.
But the average is about, that's the extremity. That's why they're using it as a quarantine number. If you've made it through 14 days and you're good, you're probably good.
okay.
But 5 days is the average from contact to onset of illness.
Okay.
And you could have the virus then, as we've said multiple times here.
Now, Angelica is asking about getting tested for the coronavirus, but we want to mention once again that you don't just walk in and say, hey, I need a test for the coronavirus. Your doctor has to feel pretty strongly that your symptoms indicate you may have it.
Yeah, they're probably not going to want to overwhelm the system. I mean, we still have a limited number of testing kits, and those should be reserved for serious cases. In other words, if you're sitting home and you're sort of health conscious and you're getting a little paranoid about all this and all this media stuff about it's on incessantly, I just want to go get tested. I don't think they're going to agree to do that.
Okay.
I think they're going to say we have an obligation to be responsible stewards of limited resources, and right now tests are a limited resource. We need to use them wisely. Right now the CDC wouldn't say that kind of person should get tested. They have criteria for it, and pretty much all of them have fever associated with the test.
And that's what I want to talk about, the types of symptoms and how long. You've indicated can be anywhere from 5 to 14 days when you start to feel the symptoms. But what exactly are we looking for? Fever, I know.
Fever, sore throat, cough, shortness of breath, weak, achy joints, achy muscles, headache, that type thing.
So again, this sounds like the flu. Certainly the
It's
onset
like the
of
flu, and like the flu, it's probably, for an uncomplicated case, probably about a 5 to 10 day illness,
Okay.
just like the flu.
And that's assuming that you're healthy enough to be able to kind of ward off some of the worst symptoms.
Right. And then the other thing we should mention as well is that just because you have recovered clinically doesn't mean you're not shedding the virus. Right now it's looking like you shed the virus out as long as possibly 10 and maybe 10 days and 2 weeks.
So maybe you are still contagious
You would
even
still be
after you
considered-
feel a lot better.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a big issue. Now this is one, certainly as we approach the weekend, and in my mind we're always approaching the weekend, but this is coming from Alyssa, and she says, what about going to church? Are they going to allow church services? And on the other end, what about casinos? Are they going to close? So she's concerned about churches and casinos.
Well, you know, the leaders in those places are going to look over all this information. They may take the lead from what happened with the rodeo today and say, you know, we just can't find ourselves accountable for anything bad happening to anyone. We have a lot of elderly parishioners. I mean, is it right for us to bring them here, or can they just pray at home this week or for a while? I think those decisions are going to get made at every place. Some places may be doing it not just from an altruistic point of view, but also from frankly, a liability point of view.
Yeah, they want to make sure that things are safe
and someone's not going to charge them later with you put me at risk.
Yeah, by having that. Well, our church is like a lot of churches now, and it's not even, I think, high tech anymore. We have our services online. We stream our services. So it may possibly be that you can continue to enjoy your service without having to put yourself at risk. And I believe you and Chauncey may have talked about this, but it seems to keep coming up. Is it possible to get the virus from handling money? And another corollary there has also been, is it possible that a package, for instance, that arrives from China, is that going to put you at risk at all?
For the latter, I'd say it's highly unlikely right now. The limited information available suggests that the virus can be viable outside a body. So it's not like once it gets outside your tissue, your cells, it dies. Many infectious agents do, but this virus seems to have the ability to live for at least hours, if not maybe some days or a week.
Which is why we want to make sure we wipe everything down.
In organic surfaces, we call them fomites in our business, but it could be a dollar bill, it could be a credit card. So if you're handling credit cards and pens at work and signing people out, you're a waiter or waitress, got to be washing those hands all the time, because that material could be picking up the virus. And to that end too, one question always comes up is, well, how do we clean? Most of the EPA approved disinfectants for the home will be satisfactory, even a 10% Clorox solution. But most of them, if they have alcohol in them, usually they do, they'll be sufficient for cleaning viruses off surfaces.
But you say it can actually last up to a week on a surface?
Well, we don't know yet. They're
Okay.
right now saying days and maybe a week, but a package from China, I'm assuming, takes a while to get here. I don't think that it's likely a package arriving would have a viable virus on it.
Now, I know we are not doing perhaps as much interaction with other countries as many of you would like in the infectious diseases business, but what are we learning from what's happening in China and Italy? Because in both cases, we see it growing exponentially. So we start off with a couple of people who are sick, and then that goes to dozens who are sick, and then hundreds. What are you learning from watching that, and certainly the spread of it?
Well, of course, we don't have a model where anyone got on top of it proactively. And China was reactive, and frankly Italy was too. And this will be a different model, because some things lag, like getting enough kits, but to be honest, I think we've really, in terms of keeping some people out in the ships for a while and then putting them in military bases and so forth, we sort of been ahead of that, and that's going to change that a bit. But right now the doubling time of this of cases seems to be about 6 to 7 days based on those models. And to give
Meaning that you start off with
two, then you have 4.
Right.
And if that goes 2 to 4 to 8 to 16, that's called an exponential doubling time.
Okay.
And what that translates into is, if you have 500 cases today, 500 ill people with COVID-19, and the doubling time is 6 days, and 11 doubling times, which is roughly 70 days, you'd have 1 million cases from
That's
500.
Incredible.
So that's
So it's like watching, I don't know, a single organism, a single cell organism just sort of divide off and divide off and divide off.
Yeah, it's like those videos we've seen of cancer cells just chaotically unchecked. So this is a wildfire situation, and no leader should say it isn't. And I think that's what the leadership is responding to. People are saying, oh, we don't have that much here in Texas yet. We don't have that. But in 2 weeks, it could be crazy. In Boston, overnight, Massachusetts, I think the cases doubled from 50 to 100, 110. And that's because there's a lot more people, probably thousands in Boston right now, asymptomatically carrying it and spreading it. So I just read on the way over here that Governor Baker up there just declared a state of emergency. I don't think they're overreacting. I think they're looking down the line and realizing once the genie's out of the bottle and we had a chance to at least slow it down. People might say, well, what's the difference whether it happens like this all at once or slows down? Well, if you draw out the epidemic over 2 months rather than in 3 weeks, you don't overwhelm the healthcare system to where people are showing up in droves and respiratory failure and you're out of ventilators.
Right.
In other words, we have a fixed amount of resources, and there's no way to ramp up from so many ventilators in Houston that can handle someone in respiratory failure and save their lives, and suddenly triple that amount. It's not happening. So if you can sort of slow the rise, it's possible that you can use your limited resources to meet the need.
Let's talk again about community spread, which is what we're learning a little bit about. And what we do know is the gentleman that was at the rodeo, barbecue cook-off, had not traveled outside of the country, was not part of the group that went to Egypt, but in fact was right here in Texas. Do you worry about that? The fact that we're no longer looking at, very clear reasons for someone contracting the disease to possibly I'm, in the same room or somebody coughed on me.
That's the technical
That's the
term
nightmare,
in the literature is called community-based cases. When you see that term, that means they weren't in China or they weren't roommating or traveling along some guy who was in China or in Vietnam or Malaysia or someplace. Don't know where this came from. This guy was walking around, minding his business, doing his job, and suddenly he's got coronavirus. We're at that level in several states now. And now really asking where someone travels is irrelevant. Our staff were doing that on the phone a few weeks ago. I told them, don't even ask them anymore. Just ask them about their symptoms because it's community-based now and that's going to become the majority.
And you think that's where we are now, the community spread is next? And
Well, it's a minority of cases yet, but very soon it's going to become a community-based illness. It's going to become
she's so shy.
another
she
way
doesn't
to
want to walk
way to use another technical term. It'll become endemic to the United States. Won't be imported. It'll be our problem.
It'll now be our headache. All right, and you've got a couple more.
From
All right.
our Facebook comments who are watching the stream now.
And many of these folks are really asking about very specific illnesses, but there are a couple of also more general questions. And I'm going to look at this one.
Yes.
Driana, I'm going to hope that's how I'm saying her name correctly, who says, I'm seriously freaking. My baby woke up with fever and a pink eye. I feel like it's viral, but I'm so freaked to take him to the doctor or hospital to get tested. I don't want him catching the virus, and I presume while in the hospital.
Well, you should be more concerned that there's something else wrong with your child that's treatable.
Okay.
And you don't short yourself on medical care and attention that's necessary for the fear of something that probably won't hurt the child. I mean, the mortality rate for kids under 9 years old is something like 0.1%, one in 1,000.
So they aren't getting sick enough to...
They're not getting sick, so even if your child had coronavirus, first of all, it's probably more important for
the pink eye?
Triana.
Yeah.
It's probably more important for her to find out whether her kid has it for herself and her parents and anyone living with her than the child. That sounds odd, but the coronavirus is not a risk to her so much at her age. But if she's got something else that's treatable, she wants to get to the doctor. And the way to handle that fear, understand that's a good point. And I've made that point that medical facilities are where sick people congregate. So you want to call your doctor. You need to express to the staff, I'd like to bring the baby in. How can you work with me on my cell phone so that I bring the baby in and we get right into a private room so that we're not exposed to other people?
The baby's
The
not
public at
sneezing
some
on somebody
point
else.
may have to teach some of their doctors this. We're not all sort of equally trained. My orientation is towards stuff going on around the world and contagion. A urologist isn't, a GP maybe a little bit is, but they may have to be told by their patients, I'd like to be handled this way. And that's what you got to do. You may have to take that message forward.
An excellent point. And I want to go back in just a moment to your statement that this is no longer another country's problem, it's ours. But in the meantime, I'd like to get through at least one or two more questions. This one is from Jessica and says, Jessica says, I have hypothyroidism. Is that considered to be a compromised immune system? Also, and this is a big question for a lot of people, I'm 6 months pregnant. Does that also put me at higher risk? And I have a couple of questions, people asking about pregnancy and where the risk stands in that case.
Well, we don't know with the fetus. I'll be honest. We just don't have enough developed yet to know. It's not been around long enough to know if enough babies have been born and they've been born with a problem that would have been due to coronavirus, but not to the pregnancy. So the window's too short. This stuff just started up in December. As far as pregnancy is not an immune deficiency state, neither is hypothyroidism.
Okay, so in both of those
you should
cases,
be healthy and fine.
Yeah, Jessica should not have to worry about that. Just get through the pregnancy and stay healthy. Now, this is from Veronica, and Veronica wants to know about sarcoidosis. What precautionary measures can a person take having sarcoidosis, which of course primarily affects the lungs. And you talked about lung illnesses.
Well, it's one of those conditions. It's an odd and unusual, uncommon condition, but the biggest problem I would see with sarcoid patients would be if you're on treatment for it, which is usually prednisone steroids. And of course that can downregulate your immune system, particularly to some certain kinds of agents like funguses and viruses. So you'd have to be a little bit more astute and aware, in tune with your body, that if you're running a fever, you really need to see a doctor and not sit on it too very long.
Yeah. Now, I do want to go back to what you said, which is that this is now our problem, meaning the U.S.'s problem.
Yeah.
So we're no longer looking at people coming off of ships or coming off of planes or trains and automobiles. Now we're talking about person-to-person contact, that community spread you were saying?
Right. I mean, it's already here. I wouldn't say, bring 3 boatloads of people over with coronavirus and just let them walk in.
Right.
But I would say that it almost doesn't matter now that anything comes in from another country, because the only exception to that statement, there seems in medicine there's always an exception. There's the surface and then there's a few other levels. Recently, there's been identified a couple subtypes of coronavirus, and they attach, and this is technical, differently to receptors in people, and one's a lot more virulent, which is our term for causing severe disease, meaning organ damage, and the other one's a little less so. And I think they emerged in Iran and they're under study. So it could be that, do we in the US right now have the easier early China one, and this more virulent one hasn't made it to us? The trouble is there's not going to be a screening test for that. That's a high level sort of bioterrorism lab capability, and no commercial lab's going to distinguish those.
Now, here's somebody asking, should we be worried about eating out at fast food or nice restaurants, or what about shopping carts in grocery stores? And interestingly enough, I went to a nice restaurant yesterday for lunch, and it was virtually deserted. Now, I don't know if that's because I was late, it was a late afternoon lunch, or if it was because a lot of people at this point just are not choosing to go and hang out.
I've seen it around in public places too. It looks to me like people are becoming more homebodies and trying to eat at home and just not have to deal with this and all the worry about it. Anywhere you go in public, I mean, if someone's in there and their child has had this and they pick it up and now they're handling your credit card and you handle it, all bets off.
And do we need to worry about it passing through food? Somebody who's...
Oh, I don't see this, right, although I don't see this yet as a foodborne illness, but there just was a report 5 days ago saying that they found the coronavirus in some fecal specimens in people in China. And so now they're starting to study that as, can it be a fecal oral route, meaning come in with food, not just someone coughing on you. The answer's not out yet.
Okay, so many questions we still have. And if you're at home, and by the way, it's warming up in here, isn't it? We have been talking to our good doctor here about all of the aspects of coronavirus. So many of you have questions, and so we want to be able to answer them as they come in. We have been looking at your questions on Facebook Live, but also some that people have been asked about over and over again. What temperature, this person asked, is considered to be a reason for me to get my kid checked out, since fever is so much a critical part of this?
And fever is defined as a pathological increase in temperature. If you go out in Houston on August 22nd at 3 o'clock and run 3 miles and take your temperature, you probably have 102-degree temperature.
Yeah.
So the display, or the curve of temperatures that are normal for people, 98, 97.6, 98 is right in the middle, and then as high as up to 100.1 or 2, all the way down to like in the 97s, that can be your normal temperature. But most people know when they're feeling like they're hot.
Yeah.
There's something wrong.
You mean like now? No.
Yeah, like right now.
Yeah.
So I think if for the average person, if you're up at about 100, 100.2, that's probably a fever for you. You should get checked out.
And if your child has a fever of 102,
Right.
then you certainly
100.2, yeah.
100.2. Okay. I'm just looking to see here. What if you've already had the virus and recovered, but you thought you had the flu? Is there a test that can tell that you've already had it? So not on the front end, but the back end.
Well, they have the that. At some point, you'll stop shedding virus. Right now, it's looking like out around 5 to 7 days after illness recovers. So that's the direct test they're doing now with swabbing the nose and the throat. Once you stop shedding virus, that test won't be positive. I haven't seen yet, but they will be developing soon an antibody test like you would take to see if you ever had measles when you were 5. In other words, checking the blood to see if you have an antibody your immune system developed, which they always do, to the agent. But that test isn't out there yet.
What is you all's top priority at this point? And I'm talking about infectious disease doctors in particular, but doctors in general. What is the medical community really aiming to do to kind of put a dent in this?
Well, I'm aiming to get attention on concentrating on the highly at-risk groups for damage of their lungs or death.
And let's talk about that again for people who may be joining in right now. You say people 65, 70 and up.
Right.
That is our high risk.
That's our high-risk group. The rest of the folks, on a percentage basis, just get sick for a while, and then they recover 100%. We think, although again, it's going to take long-range studies to see, well, if someone had pneumonia with this, does it do long-lasting damage to the lungs? We don't know that yet. But for the most people, it'll probably just be a transient viral illness. So those people and anyone with a compromised immune system or on medications that weaken their immune system.
And also, and by medications that weaken their immune system, you mean steroids, for instance?
Steroids,
prednisone.
some of the TNF agents, the tumor necrosis factor agents that people are getting that you see advertised on TV a lot, like Humira and Enbrel. They're usually those people are getting them from rheumatologists, arthritis or inflammatory doctors, psoriasis medicines, some medicines for Crohn's disease. Most people know because they've been schooled by their doctor that if they get a fever, they better call because they're prone to TB and fungus and stuff. So if your doctor's ever told you, this medicine may weaken your immune system, and usually they have you sign a consent before you take the medicine, warning you that you need to be informed. You're that group. You're in that group of people.
And I assume people who are undergoing cancer treatment. We have a lot of people who come to Houston for that.
Yes.
Yeah, as a matter of fact. So given the fact that you've got all of these different categories of people, we're talking the elderly, people who have compromised immune systems. You indicated people with lung diseases of one sort or another.
Lung, heart disease. People have had strokes before, any kind of brain damage.
Really? Now that's a new
Well, because
category.
an awful lot of brain damage has to do with poor circulation of the brain in elderly populations.
Okay, so again, we're going back to elderly. Now, we've been hearing from some people that, for instance, nursing homes may be a real petri dish, if you will, for this disease. What do you tell people to do? Certainly, if they've got elderly parents or they themselves are living in a facility with a lot of other older people.
They should probably back off visiting, or they, for a while, or if they just feel they have to go to oversee the care and they just have to, on a social level, be there near their parent. Some people are in their last days and they have to go visit. Go there and wash your hands going in, wear a mask so you don't bring something with you.
And if you're visiting somebody in a hospital or a rehab center, for instance, what do you do?
I think washing hands is sufficient. If you have respiratory symptoms, don't go.
Okay,
Stay away.
Don't even go.
Yeah, just stay away.
Okay. And people always say they get sick in hospitals. You may go to visit someone there, or you're staying for a few days, and the next thing you know, you're much sicker. If you have any indication that you're not feeling well, do you not go to a hospital?
I would say so nowadays. Hospitals, unfortunately, are buildings with sick people.
With lots of germs.
And lots of germs around. I mean, they're really good. Nowadays, you go into a hospital, every room has a cleaning station outside of it. And by the way, that would be another message in the midst of this thing, that those businesses that are out there that are service oriented businesses with the public, they probably got to be thinking about looking into buying some hand cleansing stations that they can put at their front door for people coming to restaurants.
The minute you walk in the
minute
door.
you walk in, you clean your hands off, and their staff can use them as well. The hospitals are all outfitted like that, but they've been that way for some time. For influenza season, we're all mandated, those of us who admit patients and consult in the hospital, that we have to have a flu shot every year or have a reason for it, a valid reason not to get it.
All right, so everybody should get a flu shot. All right, Miss Monica is back.
Batch of questions
Okay.
from email.
All right.
Now, one thing I'd like to mention is, if I could, I've spent quite a bit of time answering a lot of
Come on in, Monica, that's fine.
these type questions and putting updates regularly, about 7 or 8 of them in the last 2 weeks on my websites. So if people want fairly valid information that has an editorial flavor to it, like we're doing here, a thought piece, you're not learning technicalities about the virus, just like, well, what if this, what if that, which I think about this. If they want to check out our website, we've got it up there for the public.
Okay, and again, we want to just remind you, we're talking to Dr. Ed Rensimer.
And
I got it right finally.
That's it.
And who is an infectious diseases specialist, so he is helping us kind of understand what is going on with the coronavirus. Now, here is something that a lot of people have been talking about, and I keep hearing, oh, it's going to pass as soon as the flu season is over. So Carol asks, will this calm down the hotter it gets in Texas? Should we be buying only frozen foods and canned goods? And I think those are two different questions there, but
well,
will it calm down? Are we looking at,
we don't know.
come June, July, perhaps this will kill off a lot of the bugs?
We don't know. We know some viruses like flu are subject to heat change as well as UV light deactivation. And part of that seasonality goes along with people not being clustered inside of closed ventilation spaces close together, coughing in each other's directions. In those summer months, people spread apart a lot more. So it's not really clear how much of it's societal epidemiology or how much is there's the warm seasonality kills the virus. We all have our fingers crossed, obviously. Right. I mean, I know the president is talking about that, and he's hoping that that's going to be the decline of this if we just get through this month.
Okay.
And as far as the foods go, that's a judgment call you have to make on, I guess, on how much panic you're seeing out there. Have a feeling we're not going to run out of food in this country.
Yeah. Or toilet paper, let's hope. We see people buying toilet paper like crazy. All right, this is from Charles, and he asks, since stores are out of alcohol, and apparently it's another thing that people have had a run on, is there anything else effective at killing viruses like vinegar, for instance?
That's acetic acid. It's not.
So alcohol is really the...
Yeah, the virucidal.
Okay. Here we go. Stephanie says, I have an 11-year-old son who has latent tuberculosis and has been treated through the 10-month program required by the CDC. Does he have a greater risk of contracting COVID-19?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Latent TB means you don't have an infection somewhere along the line. He picked up the germ for TB, and it's sort of hidden in his body, and it's not causing any problems. He's a normal kid.
Well, Doctor, we're going to wrap this up in just a couple of moments, but if you will, kind of go through the most important things we should be thinking about. There are a lot of people poo-pooing this who feel as though this is an overreaction, but is there anything you sort of want to say to the public out there, starting with whether they should be taking this seriously?
Well, I think it needs to be taken seriously. I think that we've run a fine line between being dismissive and maybe a little bit arrogant in our attitude about it, that this is no big deal, and putting other people down and criticizing them because they're taking it seriously. And then there's another side where you're panicked beyond belief and laying awake about this. The best thing to do is keep on top of it, see information develop, make rational decisions, make personal decisions about your family and your own life. If you've got elderly people in the family, pay real attention to them. They're the ones that are really at big risk for problems.
Once again, we're talking about the highest of risk are people over the age of 70, and certainly people with compromised immune systems.
And if you have to engage in the healthcare system, whether it's a doctor office visit or you're getting elective surgery or you're going to a lab, when you go to those places, get in and get out and communicate with the people before you show up that, because of the circumstances, you really want to get your appointment time and stick to it, even if you have to wait outside their office. I wouldn't be hanging out in the doctor's office these days.
Yeah.
I hang out in one.
Yeah, but the rest of us don't need to. And the things we need to do, we know wash hands. That is at the very top of your list.
Yeah, and that's complete washing. Oddly enough, there's even YouTube pieces on how to wash hands. I never thought I'd see that, but soap and water is adequate, by the way, but it's got to be all surfaces and the crevices and nooks and crannies. And theoretically, about 20 seconds of hand washing
So
with
a
soap
little
and water.
happy birthday chorus.
Right,
And there you go.
or the cleansers are fine too.
Yeah. So hand sanitizer or washing all of the time. Anything else we should be aware of? Should we be avoiding certain places, avoiding certain people?
Well, I think.
How do we kind of go about our lives safely but without in a state of panic?
Well, right now the focus, and I've said repeatedly, is the healthcare system where the cases are going to concentrate, and the sick cases. So the people that have the most virus to give are going to be there, and in the hospital they're probably going to be isolated off, and you're not really at great risk in a hospital. But in a hospital emergency room lobby, in a doctor's office, very possibly. So you really need to focus your time on wisely engaging in the healthcare system. And if you can put something off because it's elective, like an annual physical, this isn't the time to do it. Put it off a couple months. Get your doctor to prove it. Don't make a medical decision. But that would be the main thing, I think. And I right one now would stay away from large crowds myself.
Okay, and what about traveling?
I think traveling's okay as long as, again, you exercise reasonable caution with it. If I'm going to get on an airplane, I'd probably have a respiratory mask just in case I get seated next to someone who looks or acts ill. And then hand cleansers. You're going through an airport. It's a very public place. You're going to have to think about, I don't know the restrictions on the TSA on stuff like that, or carrying liquids on board. So you may want to check out if you're going to carry something before you show up and they take it away from you.
Yeah, exactly. But finally, this is something we're all taking.
No cruises.
Yeah, no cruises, that's right. Yeah, I think the cruise business right now is probably suffering pretty badly. But the bottom line is, for all of us, this is something we should be taking seriously. You're watching it grow. And it's not just people from China or people from Egypt or people, and I'm not saying people from, but if you've traveled there or come back. But now this is a problem that is very much alive and well right here in our midst.
It's community-based.
Okay. Well, Doctor, thank you so much. We appreciate it. I know we've been chewing your ear off for the last hour and a half, but our viewers and certainly all our folks on Facebook are very concerned and very interested in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we appreciate it.
Right.
And of course, you can always go to Facebook or you can go to abc13.com. We are constantly updating you on the coronavirus. But for now, I'm Melanie Lawson. Thanks for being with us.